What are the three key fantasy football questions facing the 2022 Cleveland Browns as they head into training camp in the preseason? It's time to break it down right here and right now as we begin another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. We're getting closer to training camp. We know we're past the all-star break in baseball. That means training camp is right around the corner here for all teams in the NFL. They're going to be opening up. Some will be reporting in full by early next week. So end of July, early August, we know things rev up and heat up in reality for the NFL, but also for fantasy football as we inch toward our drafts here. Hopefully most come at the end of August or early September before kickoff of the season and week one in the regular season. So we got to lead you up to there, and we're still going through all 32 teams. We're breaking them down here. We are in the middle of the AFC North, so a couple more teams to get to in this division. The Cleveland Browns, today's team, they take the spotlight. Big questions surrounding them. Tomorrow we'll look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, and then we'll start looking at the AFC South. So getting to the home stretch of looking at all these teams here and kind of setting the table, and how we're doing it is looking at three key questions, and the Browns certainly have their share here. So one surrounding the quarterback, that might be the biggest question of them all for any team in this league. Then we'll look at the running back situation and wide receiver as well in today's show. Before we do that, I got to tell you, thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. We're free and available to you on all platforms. Now, all right, the Cleveland Browns have that one major cloud hanging over them. And with fantasy football, we are interested to know if Deshaun Watson is not suspended for the full season. If it's full season, then we know that we're just going to be off Deshaun Watson. But what if he's suspended for 6-8 games? Is Deshaun Watson worth the risk for the potential reward here for whatever his suspension turns out to be in 2022? That's our first key question with the Browns. And look, when Deshaun Watson is on the field and he doesn't have the off-the-field concerns, he produces. Why? Because he's a very aggressive downfield passer. He's going to extend plays, but he's also very good at running, taking off, and putting up points that way. And he's also gotten better over the years at the short to intermediate passes, the checkdowns as well. So he has the full arsenal, big arm, can push the ball downfield, can check down, can take off and run, can put up touchdown numbers pretty heavily, and big passing numbers we've seen. It's a little bit different with the Browns because the Texans, past few years, when he was on the field, he didn't play at all, we know, in 2021, that he was putting up some big numbers because the Texans were kind of diminishing their returns on defense. It wasn't J.J. Watt and Jadeveon Clowney and the anchor of that team up front really delivering. They needed Watson to throw quite a bit. So he's been a high-volume passer. They let him loose here. But the difference in Cleveland, again, they are a run-oriented team. It doesn't matter that Watson is in there. They're just looking for a little bit of a higher ceiling when they do pass and to play off that and get those deep shots downfield and to take advantage of the running game setting up play action and the concepts that Watson is so good at grasping, throwing downfield. So that's why he's in there. He can take better advantage of the running game to make big plays in the passing game. That doesn't necessarily mean higher volume for Watson. Keep in mind, this team still has an elite offensive line. They are very good at running the football. They like doing that. It's the Kevin Stefanski bread and butter. They're not going to suddenly open things up and chuck it all around the building just because they have Deshaun Watson. I think it's more calculated that when you get to the point of the playoffs and you can try to use your defense and running game, you have a quarterback that can put you over the top and it's not going to be a liability or hold you back in their perception the way that Baker Mayfield did a little bit. He was a little bit too dependent on things working on the running game. Here, you have Watson who's independent. So if there's a game where the running game is not working or team keys off to take away the run or the offensive line struggling a little bit and they're not protecting as well, Watson can make things happen. He can improvise, get out of the pocket, get the ball downfield, extend plays, take off, and add to the running game himself. They like that element as well. So there's plenty of reasons why the Browns thought he was a worthy risk because they think with Watson, they have a better shot of winning the Super Bowl. They have much higher ceiling at quarterback, and it makes a lot of sense. But that said, I don't think they want to chuck the ball a lot because, again, you have Myles Garrett on the other side. You've got a pretty good developing defense that's making a lot of plays. You can run the ball. You got the offensive line. And the thing on top of that is this receiving core is remixed here, and we'll get into them in our third segment here on the show. But Amari Cooper is your new number one receiver. So Deshaun Watson adjusting to a new receiver who's also adjusting to a new offense on a new team, his third team, after playing for the Raiders and the Cowboys. So Cooper and Watson are trying to get things going for the first time. You have a drop off there. You don't have Jarvis Landry or Odell Beckham Jr. So working in different guys on the depth chart, mainly youthful guys there. So it's not very great here for Deshaun Watson weapons-wise. And at tight end, you don't have Austin Hooper anymore. So David Njoku is franchise tag. So Cooper is your most established receiver overall, but David Njoku has the most experience just with the Browns in this particular style of offense, and that's why they kept him. They also have Harrison Bryant at tight end. Donovan Peoples-Jones is a deep threat there. You've got the rookie David Bell and Anthony Schwartz, who's shown some things with his speed but can't stay healthy. Jakeem Grant and Jamarcus Bradley are your top receivers. So there's not a lot there. You got a lot of checkdowns from Kareem Hunt. You got the capability of Nick Chubb to also contribute in the passing game. But overall, the weapons are not plenty. The volume is going to be limited. So here's how I look at it. You can take the risk on Deshaun Watson, but you have to have a very viable alternative here. I think right now it is trending toward half season. That seems to be the compromise. The full might be too long, especially when he sat out all last year. I get he was paid for it, but that is being a factor here that he's missing time, which is just as important here in this situation. So the money is there, but it's also the time. So I think it's trending to him missing a season and a half overall. So 6 to 8 games has been kind of the wheelhouse for this Watson suspension all along. Now, he could be a guy that is a league winner in the second half. He's that good of a quarterback, but maybe figure it out. If you're going to invest in Deshaun Watson, where do you take him? I don't think you take him too highly because there are a lot of good quarterback options that you can go wire to wire here as your QB1. So I'll look at it. Maybe he's the 10th or 12th, something range quarterback off the board. But if you're going to do that and be aggressive, you have to get someone that you can play for several weeks. So you might have to invest in 2 starters, maybe a Tom Brady or an Aaron Rodgers even. Rodgers and Watson would make a decent combination here. You just have to have a way to kind of hold the fort here for 8 games. So if you're also aggressive and you like to play the streaming game, you can try to stream and make Deshaun Watson your first pick at the back end of the QB1s going into the QB2s. Right now, I prefer to take that risk into the QB2. So if I'm taking 10, 11, or 12, I think it's a little too high for me. Just because half games, that's a lot. In fantasy football, that's a lot. Keep in mind, you have start the fantasy playoffs earlier. You need someone to get you there. You can't just try to say, okay, I'm going to stash in for the playoffs and go there for the final 3 weeks, especially when you're not factoring in week 18. So you're limited there. Once you get to that half season, you got to drop Watson into the deep QB2s. If you're at 6 games, you can maybe creep him into the back end of the QB1s and take him in the 14 range, 15 range. But for me, if he's missing half the season, you drop him into 17 to 20 range. I think that's just the way you have to go. But again, you have to decide, do you want to invest 2 reasonable picks at quarterback? And that's the thing. If he goes to having more games, you're going to have a better investment early in quarterback. So it's a little bit easier to handle the streaming game for 6 games really than 8 games. We know that's 2 games, but it's also half the season and also hedging your bets there. So really, I am not going to be too risky with Deshaun Watson. There's just too much value at quarterback that can go in a different direction. I don't want to get into a situation where I'm looking at Watson. Who do I want to put in there? Do I need multiple quarterbacks to stream while he's out? It's just too much for me. and too rich for my blood, especially if it's 6 to 8 games. If it's 4, then we're talking a little bit differently. It's a chance to really get to that point of taking that chance. We saw that with Tom Brady with the Deflategate suspension. He worked out really well for a lot of the teams by having someone to just plug and play for those first 4 games. Now, the other question is, would you want to play Jacoby Brissett in the place of Deshaun Watson? I'm not going to go there. We tried this once with him and Andrew Luck in the post-retirement just 3 years ago. Not going to go with that with Brissett. So find your quarterback options elsewhere if you're going to take that chance on Watson a little bit later in your fantasy football drafts. All right, there you have it. That's addressing the number one key question surrounding the Browns here in 2022 with their quarterback, the newly acquired quarterback that they're paying a ton to, gave up a lot for. Will he be on the field there to help us in fantasy football? Again, it's complicated, but a little bit more conservative than others in trying to make that type of move, especially with personnel. Go on the safe side with Deshaun Watson. BetOnline.net is a fast and easy way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the number one online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be number one top online resource for all your sports rating information. From live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts, they have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use a mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let us continue the show here in a moment, breaking down the 2022 Cleveland Browns, the key questions surrounding them. We answer the big one with Deshaun Watson. How risky should you get in drafting him? Which NFL stars move the betting line the most? Speaking of Deshaun Watson, starting July 18th, that was early this week, Locked On gives you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at BetOnline. Available July 18th through now on Locked On NFL, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. That's where you can also find Locked On Fantasy Football. All right, let us move to the question surrounding the Browns backfield. Can you trust Nick Chubb as an elite RB1? Now, why ask this question? Chubb has had some durability issues. He's gotten paid. So those things are gone. The motivation, the wear and tear have caught up a little bit on him. You have Kareem Hunt in the receiving role. He should be back healthier this season. We talked about Deshaun Watson as a check-down guy that can handle that. And right now, Hunt is a high-end flex. He's going in the 30s, really as high as 27 in that range. So just out of RB2 range when you're looking at standard leagues, half point and full point PPR. Kareem Hunt, of course, has a little bit more value there because of his reception volume. Then you have Dearness Johnson. We know what he's done before here. He has been a super sub for both of these guys when they've been out before. So Chubb, I think you can trust him for the most part, but it's a different style of offense here. Will they hand off more? Will they lean more on Chubb with Watson out? You'd think so. So I think my answer is Kareem Hunt's fading a little bit in his role. Dearness Johnson is pretty much just a swing back at this point, even though they like him. They want him because of Chubb and Hunt having the durability issues of late. But yeah, I feel pretty good about Nick Chubb there at the back end of the RB1s. I'm not going to take him in the top 5, top 6, but if I'm looking at 8, 9, 10, I think that's the right spot for Nick Chubb among the RB1s. He's just too good an explosive runner. This team should be very successful as well. We talked about this, that this is not necessarily an offense that's going to open it up in the passing game because they have Watson. And again, they probably won't have Watson for much of the year. That would lean more toward the power running game and Chubb, and less of maybe Hunt. Now, Brissett could check down to Hunt quite a bit here and help, but Chubb, again, can catch passes. It's kind of bad when the Browns telegraph things a little bit, so they don't want to keep it to a point where Chubb is the pure power running back and then Hunt comes in and they're using him as a change of pace and throwing to him. I want to have versatility with both backs. So I could see a situation where, even though Johnson is a pretty good swing backup behind Chubb and Hunt, where Hunt pretty much sees more of a secondary role with some key touches when needed. But Kareem Hunt has had a few more durability issues at this point than Chubb. And because of Hunt, Chubb has been able to stay fresher with his legs here. Remember, he had Carlos Hyde in those situations here early with Chubb in his career, but then he exploded in that long touchdown run. Remember that. And then it's never been the same since. So These Georgia backs, while they're in their prime in the NFL, keep sticking with them. Chubb is just a guy that I like because he can explode and take over games. He's going to be the main guy that scores the touchdowns here out of the backfield. And again, Watson is just going to give him more help here. When you have a running quarterback, we've seen that with Lamar Jackson and his backs and Kyler Murray with his backs. When you have a running quarterback, it's going to help your traditional running back quite a bit in the power running game. And obviously, Watson brings an element that Baker Mayfield cannot. And Brissett can also move around a little bit. But again, when Brissett's in there, lean a little bit more on the run. With Watson there, open up the offense. More running lanes created because you're concerned about Watson taking off and running. So however you look at it with Chubb, he's in a great position to succeed. Again, there are enough guys that you would take ahead of him. But if you want to just take a guy that after a lot of those guys are off the board, people maybe pivot to wide receiver and tight end a little bit, maybe even grab a quarterback early. He's a guy that you want to jump in there, right there at the 8 to 10 range as your RB1. Be very happy about it. And if you can, try to get Kareem Hunt. But if you can't, wait later and get Dearness Johnson to protect your investment in Nick Chubb. Either way is fine. I think Hunt, it'll be a little too rich for your blood to do that. With Johnson, you can get him on the cheap and try to beat the Hunt owner to that guy as much as you can, because then he's kind of the true handcuff. Because, again, they're not going to fully trust Hunt in a big workload. I think he has his role set. So invest in the insurance. It's going to help you a lot with Dearness Johnson. We saw that he was very productive. We saw that Thursday night game last year against the Broncos. He's going to deliver there for you. So, again, Chubb, Johnson, easy combination there that you can target in fantasy football drafts here in 2022. All right, that takes care of two key questions, one bigger than the other with Watson versus Chubb here. Chubb, again, still rely upon him as your RB1. Now, we will get into the big wide receiver question with the Browns in our final segment. Before we do that, make sure to check out all the great shows here on the Locked On Network. NFL is about to rev up again. We're going back to 5 days a week here. Training camps are opening. You need to know what's going on with all 32 teams. So we're going to have you covered as much as possible there. All the latest news, notes, anything you need to know, setting you up for what's coming up in the league. So really excited to have everyone back in full strength here, looking at the league as a whole with camps opening around the league. So awesome time of year. The anticipation. Every team has high expectations. We'll see if they can live up to them. And all the newness that's there with all these teams catch up there only on Locked On Network with our Locked On NFL podcast. And really, overall, team by team, your favorite team, we've got you covered here on Locked On. All right, it is time to close the show and break down our biggest wide receiver question for the Cleveland Browns. And here's a question. Can Amari Cooper rebound into wide receiver one status? Now, Amari Cooper's had an interesting career. He started out really well with the Derek Carr and the Raiders. Great value. They didn't want to pay him too much, so he moves on to the Cowboys. He immediately has a great connection with Dak Prescott. So a couple number fours at quarterback, Derek Carr, Dak Prescott. And he ends up with another guy notable for wearing that number 4 in Cleveland, and Deshaun Watson. So he's got to bounce around. He just gets the job done. What was hurting Amari Cooper a little bit last couple of years is some injuries have crept in there. You've also had CeeDee Lamb be a factor as they kind of took a luxury pick there with Jerry Jones and Dallas on a first-round receiver. So you had him. You had Michael Gallup cut into things. You had Dalton Schultz emerge at tight end. So really Cooper was no longer needed as that high-volume go-to guy. Well, that's about to change here because let's look at the rest of this Browns receiving corps, shall we? Donovan Peoples-Jones is a deep threat. The Michigan product, he's a guy that can stretch the field. David Bell's rookie. He's number 3 on the depth chart out of Purdue. He's got some size, some outside possession qualities. Anthony Schwartz has battled concussions here. Love the speed, can make some big plays, but right now, DPJ, Donovan Peoples-Jones, not to be confused with OBJ, is the number 1 threat there on the outside. So DPJ is still a young receiver. Bell is a rookie. You have Jakeem Grant. Again, we talked about him as the number 5 receiver. When Jakeem Grant is your number 5 receiver and behind Anthony Schwartz, you know you're thin at the position. So, again, this all indicates that there's still going to be a running team. This also tells you that Amari Cooper is going to get massive volume here. It's just going to happen. I mean, you look at Deshaun Watson in going back, who did he trust a lot in Houston? It was DeAndre Hopkins, right? he did get those deep threat balls, and DPJ could be a version of Will Fuller for him in stretching the field. But again, this is a running team, short to intermediate passes, route running, hands. Those things are all going to be important here. Amari Cooper's got all those qualities in spades here. So David Njoku, I think, will have his time. But Watson, again, wasn't a big tight end thrower. If you look at Houston, there were some games that we'd see randomly from Jordan Akins and some other guys at that position. But really, he was a wide receiver locked in guy, and he mainly did it one guy, Hopkins, looking for another guy, being the useful deep threat there in Fuller. You figure these guys are creatures of habit. They're going to try to recreate some of that here. So Watson to Cooper, he's going to be something to watch. And Brissett, if he's in there, he's going to be even more reliant on the number one receiver who's going to get open, veteran that multiple teams. He knows how to get open. Just a solid receiver overall. Amari Cooper's had that type of career here as a number one. I think he'll get back to that status. There's no co-number one status here with Lamb or trying to battle for targets on the outside with Gallup. There's none of that. Amari Cooper is the man here for the Browns. I mean, again, he should eat up these targets. So there's a lot of vacated targets without OBJ and Landry. And Landry was the big guy there making all the catches here. And you also lose Austin Hooper, so that's more vacated targets. So a lot of stuff available there for Amari Cooper. So I think he's sneaky. I think at least he's a very solid wide receiver too. With the passing volume, the Browns may be not as desired as some other teams. At the best, I think he finished in the top 12. I think just in the volume alone. So when you look at volume, when we say that, that means half point, full point PPR, a little bit more appeal. So Cooper, I think in a standard league, you feel a little bit more comfortable as wide receiver two. Not always been a big touchdown guy. As you get into half point PPR, that rises him up to wide receiver 1-2 borderline. You get to full point, I think that puts him in full wide receiver one. So again, you just have to look at the situations, what targets are available, how involved is this player going to be, what's the competition here, and what do you do when you trust a quarterback? So again, we might have to navigate through Brissett being the quarterback for 6 to 8 games here, depending on the suspension. Maybe they bring in someone else. Then you get to Watson. So, and he's going to be one of those guys. Amari Cooper has some steady production. People might be disappointed if he's a wide receiver 3 or 2 early without Watson. Then when Watson returns, hey, this is a guy that you can trade for that can give you wide receiver 1 production the rest of the way and kind of balance it out. So however you look at it, safe. He has a nice floor as a wide receiver 2 in this offense for the Browns, Amari Cooper, and that should give you an idea where to draft him there. In around the top 20, top 25 there of wide receivers, I would say top 20 is a little bit better than waiting till the end of the wide receiver 2s at 24. You can go in that direction with him in fantasy here in 2022. Adjustment to new team there, but this guy's a pro's pro. He's done it before moving from the Raiders to Cowboys. This is nothing new for Mark Cooper and how he's going to get the job done here in 2022. All right, thanks so much for listening to Locked On Fantasy Football and making us your first listen today. Now make your second listen to Locked On NFL podcast. Our national NFL experts and insiders keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories and latest news from around the league, because offseason doesn't equal breaking the action. Check them all out. Locked On NFL, Locked On your favorite team. We've got you covered here as football revs up in training camp, just like we are here with you on Locked On Fantasy Football. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this is Vinnie Iyer. Thanks for listening to our breakdown of the key questions surrounding the 2022 Cleveland Browns. On deck, another key team from the AFC North, the Pittsburgh Steelers. See you then.